like to start the meeting again and start basically where we left off in finishing up the item number 2 of the CTE, which was the adjustment to the CTE FP apportionment. We've talked about the contingency issues, the need to treat the projects fairly, both those who are coming forward for a reservation of funds and those who come forward with their plans already completed. We need to balance, point well taken, that it's a matter of balancing risk between the state and the local districts in terms of fund distribution and use. And let's see, and my understanding is that the overall discussion, I was speaking with someone during lunch, and there seems to be a concern that the program needs to be fundamentally changed in order to take into consideration some of the arguments that were being made under option 2. So, and I think that goes to the treating the projects differently or fairly. So on that note, I'm not sure if there's anyone that had wanted to speak. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, Robert. We stopped with you having a comment. Thank you. Sorry.
Of all the recommendations, is there a staff kind of favorite among the recommendations? Preferred recommendation?
The staff recommendation was the first option.
And then can you explain option 4 for me a little bit? Is option 4 a part of option 1, or kind of continues from option 1, or is it just something altogether different?
Option 4 would actually be a function more as a rider to option 1.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
It would function with option 1, yes.
And so, I mean, aside from the issues I think Bill and I brought up with regard to option 1, to begin with, you know, it really is just a wholesale change to the way that we've always been doing this, and that everyone thought moving forward how we would be doing this. And I totally agree that the premise behind it is great, and that is to get more money back into the program, and I can support that for sure and appreciate that. I just, similar to what Dennis was mentioning, I want to make sure that districts at the end of the day don't have less money than they otherwise would have for those normal things that happen in the course of construction, because a full and final is made prior to what any of us thought would happen. So I'm still favoring option 2, if any of them. I mean, my preference would be to keep doing things the way we are, or maybe an option that's not even listed here, and I apologize, I missed the last meeting. But on option 2, in that scenario where, let's say, a district does only bid 50% of the work, or only have 50% of the work under contract, how would you make assumptions about the remaining 50%, so to speak? And then also, when we're basing this on a bid, there's a number of costs, soft costs, you know, architectural testing, inspection. The equipment costs on these projects don't come till very late in the game, and so how would we ensure that we saved enough money in that project for those types of costs? So those would just be some questions that I had.
For the
I'm looking specifically at option 2.
For option 2, the remaining 50% would just be handled as it is now. It would be based off of estimates. Requiring the project to be 50% under contract just gives us a better idea of the actual real-world costs, as it were, of the project. Equipment costs, soft costs, such, are all factored in initially to the preliminary apportionment.
So whatever we estimated for those costs, we would still get to reserve
within what we have is
in the preliminary apportionment.
Yes.
Right. And my concerns are in projects such as these. There's so many unknowns and just kind of unforeseen things that we run into in the course of construction that would be tying our hands pretty quickly. So those are just some of my concerns, questions.
Okay, thank you. I believe Bruce Hancock wants to come up and address some concerns of his.
Thank you, Bruce Hancock, Gunnison Park. I've been really honestly confused during the discussion on this item, and it could be my own misunderstandings. Although I did go to Patty during lunch to have her quickly educate me on the program because I'd forgotten almost everything about it, and I think I'm misunderstanding the issue, or others on the committee are, because unless I'm incorrect, the CTE grants are based on calculations in regulation. They are based on square footage amounts, and that is consistent with all of our other programs. In other words, let's just take new construction, for instance. When you get a new construction grant, it doesn't matter what the bid is. You are not allowed to adjust it. You get no extra money for if you find out that the bid was more than your grant. It would be great to have a program like that, and as Juan reminded us, we're looking more and more like the lease purchase program and moving slowly back that way. But that isn't the way it is. And it's not the way that it is, I don't believe, in the Career Tech program either. In other words, let me give you an example. The argument here is that we shouldn't have to return the money until we know what the bid is. And the inference from that is that once we know what the bid is, we might be able to keep more of the money. I believe that's where the argument goes off the tracks. Under the current program, you wouldn't be. And let me give you an example. If you get a preliminary apportionment in this program for $2 million, when you bring your plans and specs in, OPSC will make a review of that project, and they will use the regulations, the amount of funding that is permitted in the regulations based on what's in your plans and specs. And you will then get, and of course, if there are, I believe this program allows utilities, etc. So if there are those, then those are based on estimate. But those are the only part of it that's based on estimate, just like every other program that we have. So OPSC does a review of your plans and specs, and based on the regulations and the estimate for those usually minor costs of site development, you are given a final apportionment. Let's say it's $1.5 million. The argument here today is that we don't want to give back the other $500,000 until we know for sure that we can bid within the 1.5. But it doesn't make any difference under current program regulations whether you bid within 1.5 or not. You don't get to keep the balance of the funding, let's say the difference between your 1.5 apportionment and your $2 million for extra costs that you may incur. It might be wonderful to do that, but in order to do that, I think you would have to rewrite how the grants are calculated in this program. Okay.
It's because there's not grants plus a small amount that's a cost estimate. The whole program is a cost estimate for CTE. It's a calculation of square footage. It's like the old LPP. I mean, it's like the old program. You say you're going to build an 8,000 square foot building, and you've got 600 square foot of restroom, and they give you an allowance per square foot for the whole thing.
Yes.
And so there's no flexibility there.
Yes.
And so I get an allocation, and it costs what it costs. When I bid it, if it's over, I pay for it, and if it's under, I give it back at the end of the 5006 when I do my cost estimate, when I do my expenditure audit report. But up until I bid it and I build it, and I buy my equipment and install it, I still don't know what that project's going to cost. I have a maximum allowance from the state, and I get to build my project. I can never go back and ask for more.
Okay, let me just follow that, Margie, and help me get through it now. Isn't in the program, and if I'm wrong on this, I ask your forgiveness, but isn't there in the program a regulation that states that you will get so many dollars per square foot of your project?
Not for CTE.
Not for CTE and not under the new construction.
Not for CTE.
What you're referring to is the MEFs in the facility.
Bruce, what you're talking about is like the MEFs and for the facility hardship, and there's a $1 per square foot for toilet facilities, and then another one for, and that's not the case with this program, is it?
That is correct. If I could make a quick reference here to how the regulation reads for this particular section. It reads under section 1859.193 that for a new construction project, the grant shall be the lesser of either one or two, and this applies to both qualifying SFP, mod, and standalone projects. It's the sum of the costs uniquely related to facilities required to provide CTE as determined below. A, 50% of the cost of construction for your CTE project as determined by the project architect, subject to OPSC review and approval. And that same language flows, we don't have it changes slightly for equipment. It just says 50% of the cost to equip with necessary equipment. And then site development is subject to our site development regs under 1859.76. But we don't have a specific square footage allocation. Your project could be 10,000 square feet, and it could be 30,000 square feet. But then there isn't a specific amount. We're clear here that it comes, as determined by your project architect.
And Tracy, the legislation, I believe, said on a per square foot basis, so didn't it?
It did.
Right.
And I believe I was not here for the implementation committee meetings when the program was developed, but from what I understand of that period, because of the broad variety of facilities under Career Tech, establishing a single price per square foot for this program, it just doesn't work. It would be too cumbersome to try to apply broadly a specific amount.
And so to meet that regulatory or statutory requirement, when you make your apportionment, it's expressed in dollars per square foot, but only by backing into it.
Thank you very much. That's very clear, and I appreciate it and apologize.
I appreciate your comment.
Just a quick question. Since you have a 12-month period that after you apply, how is this going to affect those folks that were in cycles 1 and 2?
The proposal is that once the regulations come into effect, that basically projects submitted after that date, that it would apply.
So this would not have any effect on those folks in cycles 1 and 2, only in 3?
Not to the OPSC yet.
Yeah. Right. So the proposal is that those that have not yet converted, that it would apply for those. Once these regulations come into effect, for any that haven't been converted, that it would apply to those moving forward.
So it could affect cycle 2 projects.
Correct.
Well, can you do that? I thought that if you come into a program that you are with those rules until the program is over, or you get out. I didn't think you could jump in the stream and then change the rules as you're going downstream.
And we asked for some advice on that, and we were advised that it is possible to move forward.
But is
with
it legal?
We believe so, yes.
Anything's
believe it is.
possible.
We believe it is legal, yes.
Is it fair? Yeah, is it fair and is it right?
So for cycle 2 projects that have had the fund release, and let's say they're even under construction, you're going to leave those alone.
Correct.
All right,
I would like to go on record as objecting to that. So, I think it should apply this, if we're going to do this, make it apply to cycle 3 only.
Well, isn't that how it's normally done in the program? That when regulations are changed, it only applies to the new folks coming in, not the ones that are already in the pipeline?
Typically. And again, because we weren't sure, we did talk to our legal counsel to clarify, and that was the clarification that we received, that it could apply to the cycle 2 projects as well.
But not one, not cycle 1?
Those are already...
All of cycle 1 hasn't quite converted. There are a few projects that received extensions that their final due date is somewhere between now and March 26, 2010. Right at the point where we are, it's possible that these regulations, should they move forward in whatever we decide is the final best way to proceed, could apply to some of those. Whether or not they would be in effect by that time is...
okay, Lyle and then Richard, please.
My voice will come back to me in a second. I just have a basic question because, you know, the whole concept of the full and final, the concept is that a district can count on that money, then that apportionment, and a district and the state can count on not having to pay any more. So the idea of the full and final was based on everybody knows where they are at a given point in time, and that's the end of it. You don't come back, we won't come back. So I don't understand, quite frankly, where the state gets the authority to come back and say, oops, we didn't like that full and final, so we're going to adjust that full and final. Number one, I don't know where you get the authority. Number two, I think it's a pretty dangerous precedent to say that a full and final wasn't a full and final. You know, this option that you have in here about having the district return the savings when the final 5006 is submitted is a pretty good one. I mean, that does get the money back quicker. It does give the district the accountability. It gives them the time to figure out exactly what their costs are, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't know where the authority to say a full and final isn't a full and final comes from. And even if there is such authority, which I doubt, I think it's a dangerous precedent to be starting to do it. Thank you.
Quick question, Lyle. Can you just clarify for me, please, which ones, what full and final are we adjusting? Which ones are you referring to?
Any full and final you make an adjustment to is an adjustment to a full and final. Whether it's round 3 or round 2, if you make a round 3 full and final apportionment, and then you come back sometime later, 12 months, 15 months, whatever the timeline is, and say, oops, not oops, but nevertheless, that's the effect of it. We didn't like that, or we'd like to do something about it, or we'd like to change it, or whatever. It wasn't a full and final.
But just to clarify, you're also talking about preliminaries being adjusted 15 months later. You're talking about the preliminary amount set aside first, that being a full and final, and then be adjusted.
Is it not a full and final?
No, and I think that's what we're trying to clarify.
It's a preliminary apportionment?
Because
it says it's
reservation.
Preliminary. I'm with Bruce. I need to retire.
Can we ratify that with the celebration tonight, Lyle?
All in favor?
Richard.
I think, yeah, Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I think it's safe to say if Lyle retires tonight, I could probably afford to buy the Green Crowns. But I know he's not going to retire tonight. So my good friend over there. You know, as the rest of you, I've gone through an educational process and here in the U.S. that says that there's common law with regards to how things are run, and there's an understood commitment right now from the state with regards to this program that this money's there. The commitment was made when the reservation of funds was done. When that reservation of funds was done, there were rules that were in place at the time. The districts have a legitimate right to think that they were going to be held to the rules that were in place at the time they turned in their 5004 or whatever document it was that turned in the reservation of dollars. We aren't required under this program to submit another 5004. All we're required to provide are plans, specs, and other financial documents to show that we either have a legitimate project or we don't have a legitimate project. It doesn't change the fact that there was an agreement between the state and the school district that there was going to be a legitimate sized project of a legitimate amount of dollars, and that the rules that were going to be applied are those that were in place the day the state allocation board approved those projects. To then turn around and then tell these very same districts, oh, by the way, and kind of using friend Lyle's words, by the way, this wasn't a full and final, and by the way, we can change rules whenever we want until such time as you make that conversional document, or when we at OPSC issue you your letter of acceptance, that becomes a definitive place and time. That was never understood that way. This is a case where we want to be knowing what the rules are. This is changing the rules in midstream.
One.
I just want to be sure that we're all clear that what we're talking about is we're talking about ineligible amounts that would have to be returned at some point anyway. So the adjustments that we're talking about are for projects, costs that aren't eligible. So there's no savings in the program. They would have to be returned at a much later date. So we're trying to capture these, the adjustments that are just for this particular project, just like a project, again, just for a project that comes in with plans. What should that amount be 12 months later, now 15 months? And anything that's not, anything that, and I don't want to say that it's ineligible, then would be returned. So even if it's not returned at the 50-month stage, it still makes it ineligible. We're talking about ineligible costs that would have to come back to the program.
I don't know that we're talking about ineligible costs here. We're not. Because we haven't defined what is an ineligible cost until we close out the project.
Excessive, I don't know. It was amount. There was an estimate amount, and then based on the plans, 15 months later, now we have a more accurate number. And the difference, whatever you want to call that, that is the amount that we're trying to capture that would otherwise be captured at the audit.
And I don't disagree with part of that what you said, Juan. I really don't. And I shared with you a little bit earlier that I think the issue we're trying to deal with is when the change of scope was significant enough that, well, it wouldn't have been given that amount of money necessarily had we known that on the front end of it. And can we find a way to capture it? Well, it's been reflected back to me by all the OPSC staff that for those projects that are currently in round 1 and in round 2, we have no mechanism to recover any of those costs if they seem to have been a little bit over the edge. An example might be, instead of a $2 million project, it had turned out to be a $500,000 project. How do you recover back that $1.5 million just merely because it was a reservation and there was some major changes in the scope? I understand that. But the thing is that at the time the plans were filed and the applications were turned in, there was no mechanism to address this. What we want to do is address this issue from this point forward for projects that are submitted, the ones that are in round 3, 4, 5, if there are other rounds. And I think that's a legitimate thing to do. But to change the rules for the folks in rounds 1 and 2 just isn't fair. I do understand what you want, though.
I'd just like to make a clarification here in that there have been very, very few change of scope projects. And where actually we're seeing these, or the impetus for the discussion here today, is not pushed by changes of scope. We're very careful about what gets approved in a change of scope because there was an approval of a project scope at the first apportionment. These are, as I mentioned earlier, and when I read a little piece out of the reg, that these are cost estimates, or maybe it's even further than a cost estimate, just depends on the stage of the project. This is what the district is submitting, says their project costs. For most of these, or what they think it's going to cost, whichever perspective you're looking at, for most of these, it's the exact same project scope as what they came in with for starters. And I believe, and I think many of you would agree with me, what has changed this is the bid climate. It's not about reducing the original size of what the scope of your project was. That is a very, very small number of what we're seeing as far as the, where the impetus was coming from to make this change.
And regretfully, that is not what I understood as being the main issue here. We have a scope. If you built the scope, you were given a reservation of funds. What does it look like at the end of the day? When you finished with your bid, you're finished with your cost estimates, what's left, that's what you return back to the state. The issue that I was always under impression and discussing with have been cases where there's been truly a change of scope. The kind Margie made mention to, the kind that I've just made mention to, not necessarily that was a real example, but it's similar in case, be it a 10,000 square foot facility now only being built within 8,000. Those are real changes that might not have occurred back then, but the cost estimate, as she said, was the cost estimate at the time we turned it in. And it was a legitimate cost estimate. And now you're saying you want to recapture that because, well, there's a good bid climate. Yeah, let's deal with that at closeout like we do with all the other projects we deal with at closeout. We've already agreed that this program, the Career Tech program, unlike a standard SFP project where you can use the savings for any other capital facilities outlay purposes, is not going to allow us to do that. So ultimately that money's coming back to the state. The question is when? Is it today or is it going to be in 3 or 4 years from now? Now, if you're talking about where changes of scopes has occurred and we need to address some of that, I think that's a legitimate point for the staff to take. If the staff is just merely saying, well, it looks like we might be having $100,000 savings because of the bid climate or the geographical index or something has changed, I think that's not within the spirit of what was approved and agreed to by the districts and the applicants and the state allocation board.
Thank you, Richard. Robert. I'm sorry, Margie.
And maybe part of this is that OPSC or the state doesn't understand the risks school districts face when we have a project that really isn't clearly defined, that our ed services people are actually dreaming this together as we write the facilities grant. But when we have a project that's a dream in our educational folks' eye, is we put big numbers in the estimate. We put a big contingency. Even on our regular projects, we know how to build. If we're early on in the project, we put a big contingency, and as we get closer and closer, we start whittling the number down. We have to put a big number in because we can never go up. We can never come back to you and ask you for $1 more. Okay? And so the number starts out with a contingency and it's larger. And as the project gets more refined, we might cut scope, we might do things, but the number gets closer and closer. And if it runs over budget, I can't get $1 more from you. So I do believe they're not just change of scopes. But when we first come in and ask you for money, if we know we can never ask for $1 more, that number's going to be bigger than if you said come with your best estimate ever. And if you're over, come back and ask us for it. But we can never do that. And so the way we run our departments, those of us who are successful want to keep our jobs, is we ask for the most money possible, build our project and give you the change back with interest. And so you're talking about changing the program now. I still like the idea of doing it at the 50/06, cutting you the check back. I think that's a great idea. But asking us to do anything different is putting all the risk back on the district, and I think you're going to have fewer CTE projects completed as a result if these changes go through, except for the 50/06 piece. We'll cut you a check. Thank you.
I just want to now I'll have to concur with Margie because she said a lot of what I was going to say, but I just want to be very careful because we were saying ineligible costs. And what option 1, and therefore 3 and 4, does is when you have your DSA approved plans, now we want a new estimate. Estimates are always wrong. They're either going to be high or they're going to be low. And so on day 1, I can tell you, if you go with options 1, 3, or 4, you're going to take away, in many cases, more money than the district's going to need on bid day. Even with option 2, there's still unknowns. You can have a project, you've already bid it out, you encounter a lot more rock in the site than you thought you had. That's an allowable expenditure. It's a change order to the project. Nobody's happy about it. But under the current rules of the program, we can do that. So this is only going to hurt districts. That's all this will do.
Just real quick, again, I just want to clarify the ineligible cost, that comment that I made. I was referring to different, more accurate numbers 50 months later versus the estimated amount that was submitted at the preliminary. Not necessarily ineligible costs, just that you have a different, more accurate number at that point.
Okay. Any other comments on this particular issue? Okay. Time for summary. On numbers 1 and 2. The first one, we had a brief conversation about the extension from 12 months to 15 months. Department of Finance expressed its continued disagreement with that change, and let's see. And we also discussed the inquiry or the suggestion and interim between last meeting and this meeting that there perhaps be an appeal process for extensions of that 15-month, maybe in 3-month segments, going to the board and using the same criteria as used in the substantial progress process that the state uses to verify that the project is continuing on track. And staff opined that they were not supportive of that, and also that it would limit or it would perhaps take away from projects down further on down the line that might need that money. It would delay that money getting put out into the field. On number 2, there were some issues about the adjustment to the CTE apportionment. That's number 2. There was a lot of discussion about the need for a contingency in the case where the apportionment is based on an estimate. As I repeated earlier, when we first got back from lunch, the issue is treating projects fairly, the ones that come in with plans intact, and the ones that are asking for reservation of funds and have an extra 15 months to hone their expenditure figures and their cost figures. There's a balance of risk between the state and the districts in this discussion and this process. And that was well taken, and I think we still need to refine some of the options based on that balancing that risk. And we've heard a lot of conversation about how the different options may or may not accomplish that. We clarified that there
is only one full and final number. And let's see. And there's a additional concern that we've just discussed recently that the regulations only apply prospectively to the cycle 3 perhaps projects and not projects already in the pipe. And I think that's something that I think staff came back and explained what, the reasoning and the rationale behind why it might affect cycle 2 and some cycle 1 projects, and that's something we have to look at. I don't know if there's anything else that we need to discuss, and also of course at the end of this we'll talk about next steps for this item. Yes, Bill.
Well, actually, can I talk about a next step? I mean, at the risk of speaking for the rest of the committee, my sense of the committee, obviously with some exceptions I'm sure, but I don't believe that this committee would be supportive of this item going forward, number 2 at least, without some serious reconsideration of the approach based upon the concerns that we've heard today. I think we're all concerned about this is a successful program. It's a program that has bipartisan support, that's working, and these improvements, quote unquote, are not improvements, in fact, and I would not recommend that this item go forward, the number 2 item on this.
Okay. We're very cognizant of the board's admonition at the last board meeting that about items languishing in the IMP committee. For example, Scott Harvey made that point with the financial hardship program. So we're, I think what we're trying to do is get to a point where staff and is hearing the concerns, considering them, and I think even, of course, based on today's discussion, I believe that there will be changes made to this. But as far as did you want to see a final, or do you have a suggestion for
not
based on each option, or do you have a particular option in mind?
I don't really think that this is really ready for prime time. I mean, I don't. Based upon all we've heard and all the discussion here, this does not seem to be an improvement to the program. And I'm just going to say one other thing. OPSC doesn't do a very good job, in my opinion, of expressing to the board the concerns of the implementation committee. And if, in fact, those what happens is we have to go forward and make those concerns heard at the board, and then it somehow, then we have to get in an adversarial position of raising these concerns with the board when they could be hashed out here at this level, or our concerns could be incorporated into the item. But this item, number 2 especially, I mean, I don't have a problem with the other things we've talked about here, but this is not an improvement to this program.
Okay, Juan.
I think that we always include the implementation committee's comments to the board, concerns, even if we don't agree, which a lot of times that happens here, but we go forward with them to the board, and we do include the IMP's comments and concerns. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Don't want anybody to think that we don't do that, Bill, and I don't think that that's been our past practice.
If this goes to the board, could there be a discussion of how much money this entails? Are we expecting to get $10 million, and how does that coincide with round 3, which will go to the board at some point next year? Will there be any money returned by then? Is there?
In other words, you want a status of funds?
Well, no. That if all this money is returned, how much is all this money? Do we estimate $5 million? I mean, are we going to be able to fund
one project,
anything out of this? I think that might give the board some sense of the scale. If this were to return $200 million, there might be a little more vigorous debate as if we're talking about $5 million.
Did we have figures on the last item, guys?
We had an amount up to that point.
What do you remember what it was, Tracy?
While she's looking it up, can I just make a comment? Is it possible to parse this and take the 5006 piece. I think the 5006 piece is a win-win, and let's cut those checks and get that money back in for sure for round 3. And so maybe you can apply it to round 3, but at least take the piece that we're in agreement on and take that piece forward and get that money back in. And I think that could be a winner for all of us, and we start cutting those checks back. But if you're going to proceed with number 2, we're going to, I have a feeling I'll be lining up at the podium saying this is crazy. And I don't want to do that. I'd rather just say, take the first piece, ask for my check and interest, and let's go from there and see if we can't work out something on option 2 or whatever, number 2. I think that could be a win-win, and then you actually win something with the state allocation board. We agreed on this, and it's coming forward. We do that all the time with board policy or regulations in our school district as well. You can't always come to agreement, but the stuff you can agree on, then take that forward and at least make some baby steps.
We don't, just to clarify and going back to the next steps, this is not going to go to the November board. Want to make that clear. We do have a lot of work to do and changes, so we will bring this back for discussion at IMP. That is when, December? Yeah. Yeah. So we are not going forward with an item to the board this month. We'll bring it back for further discussion and clarify some of the issues that we talked about today.
And in the meantime, please email us to reiterate your concerns. That would help. Thank you.
Just for clarification, when does the next cycle end? Or when is it proposed?
Next.
For CTE?
Due to us March 31st of 2010.
But if you weren't to CDE by September 18th, you're out.
Right.
So, Juan, good to hear. I'm happy to hear. I would have to agree. I think items 1 and 3 are pretty cut and dry. 3 would be great if we didn't certify and that you invoiced us and didn't hit us with the PMIB. But I think those are. So I mean, I would have a suggestion if we had to change the program. In other words, I'm still not sure where this is coming from other than the idea of getting money back into CTE. There isn't other options out there, and one of them would be assess the bid, allow X amount for a contingency, and the soft costs, again, all tie in to the estimate, which we prepared, and if it's wrong, it's on us. At least, that it's not on OPSC for kind of changing the rules midstream. So there are other options out there that I think are a little more realistic and don't just add more risk to the districts. Because under this scenario, I think, will you get money back into the program? Yes. Will you underfund certain projects? Yes. And that money that just comes back might just go to underfund one more project. And so, I mean, and I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, it's what would happen. So.
All right. Thank you. Any more comments? To reiterate, this whole item will be coming back probably in December, I would say, at our meeting. All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to the new facility hardship request checklist. Here's another checklist, which we have, wasn't a certification, but it looked like a certification. So I think we've revised that piece of it. So if staff is ready, we can have a summary of where we were last meeting to continue the discussion, please.
Ready?
Yep, ready.
Hi, I'm Karen Mandel. I'm the supervisor of the policy and specials team. And
Tim Hagedis, also OPSC.
Don Littlefield.
Okay, so we're on stamp page 15. And most of this on this first page is has remained unchanged from the previous IMP meeting. Except for a couple of things. One is that the staff's proposal is now that the new facility hardship request and the appeal form 189 are going to be available on the OPSC website by October 15th. That's our new lofty goal. If we can just skip to the next page, that's the summary of some of the key points from last time and some of the suggestions that were brought up, some of the concerns, and what staff did to respond to that. Apologies for the 10-point font. Really wanted to make that stuff on the first page fit. So the first one was there was some concern about whether the request would be a required form or a required document as part of the submittal. And I just wanted to reiterate now that we encourage districts to use it, but it's not something that's going to be required by regulation. It's not something that's going to, in itself, make a submittal package be returned to a district. Another committee member brought up concern that using this checklist would make it so that school districts wouldn't have access to OPSC staff, and OPSC staff wouldn't be going out to do site visits and to do some assistance with filling out forms and getting documentation together. That's something else I wanted to reiterate, that that's not the case, that this new checklist is supposed to be a tool to help districts, but it's in addition to staff being available to assist and come out on site visits and to talk anytime about potential facility hardships. Someone else mentioned the need for a signature on the checklist, and I want to clarify again that it's not a certification. The only reason it's there is to let us know that a school district representative is aware of the request being submitted. So we want to know who's the district contact, and that's on the first part of the form. Did I say form?
I didn't hear anybody say anything.
Stricken. Okay. So,
excuse me, Tim, I see the signature of district representative is still on the bottom of stamp page 19. Is that?
That's correct. And now at the front of it, page 17, there's a space for district contact information, okay. District contact name, phone number, email address. So there's still a signature at the very end, just signifying, I guess, awareness that this is being submitted.
It's just an acknowledgement.
Okay.
So some sort of acknowledgement. So it's not a concerned parent who's upset about some sort of conditions who's submitting this. We know who's submitting it, that it's a district rep. Okay.
Okay, just want to clarify.
All right. There was also a suggestion that there are some more seismic mitigation specific elements to the document, and that's been incorporated, and we'll go through that in just a couple of minutes. There's not a separate seismic section, but throughout the document there's an extra checkbox, for example, on the list of typically required documents, and there are a couple other notes throughout it referring specifically to seismic mitigation. It was also suggested that there be space to provide explanations if some of the listed documentation types are not applicable, and there are lines provided now for that. A member also suggested that architect be included as one of the common preparers of industry specialist reports, and we considered it, but right now it just looks like it's not applicable to the document. It's not one of the typical preparers that we see, and this tool is supposed to include a list of the typical documentation and the typical industry specialists. And for the appeal form SAB 189, there were some suggestions to streamline it, get rid of a couple of things, and we've done exactly what was suggested. The fiscal information section is gone. And in the new section, basis of request, one of the options, SAB policy, has also been removed at the request of an audience member. And now I just want to open it up for questions, and Don and I would be happy to go through it.
Okay, Deborah?
Thank you.
Let me come back. Why would, help me understand why you wouldn't have architect in with the other?
Because a structural engineer would be needed for a structural issue.
Okay.
And we've always required a structural engineer's report for that. And so our architect is typically involved, and it's typically the architect is the district's link to the structural engineer, shall we say. So the architect in itself would not do the calcs and the specific requirements to do a detailed analysis of structural. That's why a structural engineer exists, and that's why his report would be required anyway. So the architect is not substitute for that.
But not, I guess not always do you have to have a structural engineer on one of these types of requests.
When it's other than structural, it would be something else, yes.
If I could, you've got, there's things like fire damage, proximity to hazard. There's any number of things that could qualify under this that an architect would be perfectly qualified for. I'm concerned that you say that you're going to delete those. I don't get why you're leaving the architect off on that either. Because the architect is generally a key coordinator in this kind of work.
I haven't seen many facility hardship projects where Don's been doing it a lot longer, where the architect is used as an industry specialist. Usually there's a more specialist, like a structural engineer, who's used. It's not that there are no cases where an architect may be the appropriate industry specialist, but it's not typically seen.
Maybe we could take the high road, Dennis, as architects. Remember, we're industry generalists. We're not specialists. And so I just check other and move along, okay?
All right.
I was just responding to the specific comment that they made in the write-up here, yes.
Okay.
The way it was said, no. All right.
Another reason, some of the other reasoning is that we have been committed to not change this. This tool is not a program-changing tool, and that it's working. It's not broken. We don't need to fix it, but we wanted to make it more user-friendly, and so we could facilitate the processing of these requests.
Can I ask?
And that's the primary reason for this, and we never, the requirements we have and the specialists that we list are a suggested list, and we will look at anything case by case if there's merit.
Can I just ask a sort of general question about that, about how you're basically saying, hey, this is not an application form, we're not changing anything, and yet it is an application form, essentially, and it's a good idea. I think what you're proposing is a good idea, to have an application form for a facility hardship program, because it strikes me that this notion that you have to file an appeal to apply to the program is just bizarre. It's a holdover from a previous time, and you're going to these great lengths to avoid calling a spade, and what's the point? Why don't we just develop an application form for the facility hardship program and move along?
Well, we really don't need one.
We think it looks pretty good as is, and if there are any changes that need to be made from what's presented here today.
Ask you, what are we appealing?
It's not an appeal. That's why that was my motivation, Bill.
No, that's a different. We
my
separated the
motivation.
two issues, Bill. We have two different forms.
So are you saying we don't apply using a 189?
That's correct.
So we just apply using this application form?
If the district elects to do so.
To recap, this one of the motivations for this document is to separate that it's not an appeal, and you don't have to submit this 189 appeal form and a 5004 funding request form for just a conceptual approval of a facility hardship. So it's been separated out. The 189 will have nothing to do with facility hardships.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't understand. I thought you were...
Well, it is a bit confusing since it's in the same discussion.
Yes.
That the 189 that was formerly used to apply for facility hardship is now not going to be used for that, because we agree it's inappropriate. It's not an appeal.
Okay, I didn't understand that.
Right, but because we made changes with it, it was just... They just end up being married because they were so closely identified.
Dennis?
If we don't need this, why are we doing it?
We don't need what?
This form that's an application but not really an application. We do need it. And my point, I get back to what Bill says. We need an application form for the facility hardship. So why doesn't this become an application form rather than a voluntary, quote, voluntary request?
We don't think that we need a form. I think this is, again, just as it's optional. I want to clarify that again. The districts can use this to see if they have the components. They don't have to submit it. We get we get a package. We're going to use this. We're going to check to see that the components are there. And if there's things that aren't there, then we're going to address them. But again, we never had an actual form for facility hardships. It was a 189, which really didn't. It wasn't an appeal. So we're keeping the same spirit that it wasn't required before. It's not required now. This is just to help you.
Right,
help
but
districts.
as we talked about last time, all this information is in a handbook, right? That's what was said last time. All the information that was on this is in the handbook.
It's on the internet.
And so why do we need something new?
Can I answer that?
Please.
Bear with me while I go back to square one. I've been in the facility hardship program the longest tenured person there, and probably the second longest tenured in the office for that matter. But it has bothered me working specifically with facility hardships for years now that we called it an appeal when it wasn't an appeal, and most of them were conceptual, and the lion's share of them being conceptual, sending in a partially completed 5004 seemed totally inappropriate to me. So I have been trying to get something out there for a long time that would do away with those two forms for a conceptual facility hardship. And see, that was my driving force, and then necessity was a mother of invention. I thought we need clarification, and so often they would come in filled out wrong. We'd say check one box, they check three, check two. I mean, we weren't able to communicate. I wanted a simple tool that would allow the districts to understand what they needed so that we could communicate from the beginning, and not to take the place of the one-on-one contact like we had with you, Deborah. That's what we're all about. We're the government. We're here to help. Seriously, and we would love for you to call us.
I'm sorry. Margie, sorry. Did you want to finish your?
Go, but I'll let Margie go.
I've never seen a box I didn't want to check. There you go. It's like the all-star ballot. Mine's always void. I check all the players. If I chose not to use this form and I had a facility hardship request, I would send a I would not send a 5004 anymore, correct? I would send a letter and a big stack of stuff explaining it if I chose not to use this checklist.
Correct.
Thank you.
Assuming you're talking conceptual.
Assuming I'm, right, if I've got plans, I'm ready to go, I'm in trouble, and I'd send my 5004 in if I hadn't actually talked to you guys ahead of time. Okay, so I like the form. I like the checklist, sorry, whatever it is. It's much easier than what I had to do, which was the 189 and a 5004. That was crazy. And I was probably one of those districts who checked more than one box because I wanted to make sure I got everything. So, thank you.
Marjorie.
That was kind of my question, but I have one step. So if I were to have another facility hardship, I would go to the checklist. So I don't do the 189.
See, we're eliminating 2 forms on conceptual approvals, and we're providing you a piece of paper with a list.
Okay.
Just to be friendly, helpful. That's all it is. I know it's a concept that's hard, but please bear with me.
Well, this is almost like too good or something.
Okay.
So go back. The only thing I would do was, well, it says request, but it's a checklist. Okay.
It's a method to present your request to the board.
And if, let's just say, I didn't want to do this, or I chose not to do this, then I would just, what would I do? Just contact OPSC?
Sure, just give us a call, and we'll give you the same list over the phone, email it to you, fax it to you. We'll direct you, we'll talk with you, we'll help you.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly did before, so.
Exactly.
All right.
Brother Bill.
Richard?
Seems everyone's in agreement here, so.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I want to say, guys, that this is nice, okay? Thank you for considering the changes to the 189. I think they needed to be done. They've been there for too long. It's like, why have we had that section in there for 10 years? And it seems like not of any added value. So I think that's wonderful. I think that the idea of having a checklist like this and this one gives me as a consultant and a district a place to go through the thinking process of what OPSC may be considering, and allows us to be able to try better answer their kinds of questions or not have overlooked one that maybe they would bring up. So I think that as long as this is not a form, that this is a tool which is accompanying a cover letter from the school district, that this provides a good place for us to start with the appeal, the facility hardships request. And as long as staff is willing to still come out on these occasions when we know we've got a fast and furious moving item that may or may not shut down a school, where a district may have to bid without, or go out and have the work done without bid because it's that much of an emergency. As long as you guys can continue to come out and handle those kinds of things, I don't know that we've got much of a problem. Now, if it's going to be accompanied by a school district cover letter, then I don't know that it would need to have a signature at the bottom, because you'd have all of the contact information at the top, and that would obviate the thing about, well, was it coming in from a concerned teacher, a concerned parent, or some other citizen that had noticed something. But I support what has been happening here, and the fact that the 5004 doesn't need to come in until either you are, one, converting your conceptual to a real, or you're coming in with a real one.
Thank you, Richard, and I'd like to thank staff for all their work on this. This is a great example of staff, really, it shows that staff is really listening and are wanting to help districts, and also I think it helps them expedite the processing of these projects. So thank you, Richard. Scott. Sorry, William. Bill.
Yeah,
Whatever.
I want to thank the staff too for the customer service attitude, and obviously it comes from a long experience in the program where you've been through a lot of this stuff. So I appreciate it. If the district was participating with a project that was in the seismic mitigation program, would they fill this out also? Or isn't there, I mean, I know there's a box, but I guess this is a questioning line that I don't think this really works for the seismic mitigation program totally, because a seismic mitigation application to DSA, that's the first step, correct? So we would go through DSA, go through a lengthy process with DSA, and what I'm not seeing on here, if this is really what we use, and maybe it's not. So if we've gone through DSA and they've certified that we have a most vulnerable Category 2 building, right? And they've certified all the other things, and the next step is for us now to apply for the grant, and the grant is part of the hardship program, correct? Is this a form that would be filled out for that? Because I guess I need some help, or not.
I can help you with that. Seismic mitigation is the most recent qualifier that was added by Prop 1D to be an additional way or means that you could qualify for facility hardship, and it has its own funding source. But it is, rather than pure structural, mold, close to power lines, highway, we now have seismic mitigation as one of those possible qualifiers. Seismic mitigation, though, is unique, but this is where they've chosen to put it. And so if it's the cost to do the seismic mitigation is greater than 50%, then it's a replacement. If it's under 50%, it's a rehab. I mean, it follows along in every way. The only difference is that you work with DSA, number one, to find out, is it a Category 2 most vulnerable building? Once you get to that point and get that letter that DSA has already produced one, and we've had one of these projects approved, once you get that letter, then you're at the first step. You don't have DSA approved plans. You've just qualified your building as a Category 2.
Hold that thought, because actually it's not just that at all. Actually, you haven't just qualified it as a Category 2, a vulnerable building. You've indicated there's a potential for collapse, that you've indicated that you meet the ground shaking threshold. All of the items. What I'm looking for here is, if you want this to be user-friendly for the program, you may want to add a box or something that supplements it that basically says, I've attached the Division of the State Architects concurrence that this project meets all of the requirements of the seismic mitigation program, because there are more. And I see a box, but it doesn't really say.
Well, you're not there yet.
If you check, so it's sort of peppered throughout. If you check out page 18, stamp page 18, under governmental concurrence, there's a paragraph there. The last sentence says, for seismic mitigation requests, an additional letter from the Division of the State Architect must be included to verify the eligibility of the applicable buildings.
Okay. The eligibility of the applicable buildings.
As a most vulnerable category. I mean, we can spell it out there.
See, I think there's some confusion in a building qualifying as a Category 2 and DSA producing that letter, and a district under the impression that they have the whole enchilada. They don't. They just have that status, and now, just as if you had a regular facility hardship problem with dry rot or whatever, you would then take the next step would be to design mitigation. What's the minimum to mitigate the problem? You have a DSA Category 2 building. You've proven that. You've reached that threshold. Now you move on through the process just like any other facility hardship. And DSA would eventually produce a second letter for your plans, and they would say, this appears to represent the minimum to mitigate the problem, and yes, we require the work to be done, and just like a regular facility hardship.
Okay, I guess you're right. I see it sort of peppered throughout the application. It strikes me that we might want to make it clearer that it is a special case. There's a lot of work that you have to do as a school district up front with the Division of State Architect, not just complying whether the building complies per se to the use type and all this other stuff. So I'm just recommending that we potentially consider creating a separate item on here that this project has undergone preliminary review as part of the state's DSA seismic mitigation program. Attached is documentation from, what does DSA issue? What form do you issue when a project is is completed through your process for seismic. I know you've only done it once, so, but okay. So
it's a letter that specifically affirms that the building qualifies as a Category 2 most vulnerable. They've developed a letter, a prototype, if you will, and they generate that letter when the building qualifies.
There's a second letter.
He's talking about the second letter that only I've gotten.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
It
Mark.
talks about the ground shaking intensity and the...
Right. So basically they send a letter that basically says it meets the test and can receive funding under the seismic mitigation. And that's a separate letter, and that's only after you do all those reports.
Well, is that after you go through the OPSC application process or before the OPSC application?
Anytime you want, either time.
It's independent. It's DSA.
Okay, well, I guess I'm just suggesting that we might want to create a more clearly than peppering it throughout the application, that there's a clear path here through this checklist form application request that, allows a district, if we ever get to the point where the seismic mitigation program actually works and we have applications, then we could follow them through this.
Can I concur with that? And the reason is that if you get that first letter from DSA, you might think I'm in, and you're not in. You've got a long ways to go to actually get that second letter, and I think that's the concern. If you get that letter from DSA, you can check that box, and I'm good to go, and you may not be good. You may be a long ways or never get there, and so I think that's the other concern. That it's not just I got that first letter, my building qualifies, so now I'm seismic, and that's no one's been able to do that yet.
Well, but I think they will guide you through that once you turn.
But we can call it out more specifically on their.
Yeah, and I think, and I completely understand, guys, that there's a whole different process of getting these letters. What we were trying to do is just, at this point you get what. Maybe we can clarify what letter we're going to accept, but just say like for CDE, you're required to get plan approval. You need to submit 4.0, a bunch of different other things to get their final plan. We're not going to list all of them here. Basically, you get us your final approval from DSA that says that you meet the criteria, and now you're eligible. But how you got there, I don't think that we can list everything.
Yeah, that wasn't what I was asking. I guess I was asking for a little bit clearer pathway that clearly indicated that this is a seismic mitigation project, and you have the DSA letters and approvals for that, and then you're following up with the state to request funding, conceptual approval. Okay.
So that aside, everybody loves this. They think this is a great product. OPSC staff has done a wonderful job.
Good job.
Kudos to OPSC staff.
And don't forget, we eliminated 2 forms on conceptual.
Duly noted.
That makes up for the 2 you added in the morning.
No.
Okay. Well, this does not have to go to the board since it is not a form. It does not require reg change, and so this is a purely process enhancing tool, and I'm sure staff will make the recommended changes, and we will see this October 15th. Is it still on track?
Yeah, we can still do that.
Sure.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much. Anything more on this issue? Just a few closing remarks, and then we can adjourn. Unless anyone has any objection to that. Right, thank you. Thank you, Richard.
General Conrad.
Okay, I think the next meeting of the implementation committee will be December 3rd, Thursday. I believe we have 4 items. The CTE program improvements item coming back, the alternative education loading standards and funding item, the role of the implementation committee, I believe that was, and then the change of scope for school facility program projects. I believe we were mentioning we all have them. So it's a pretty ambitious agenda.
It's our wish list.
Yeah. So we'll do our best. We'll do our best. Yes. So I hope that.
Could I ask the OPSC staff a little bit about the going back to the role of the implementation committee?
Can we help you with that item?
Yeah, can we help you? How are you planning on providing some background? Are you what's the thought process?
Not really sure yet, but that's the general idea.
Get these guys before they retire.
We are going to try and get as much background as we can.
Right, and I've been talking.
I was only joking, but I think it is
yeah.
good. There are a lot of people in this room and in Sacramento, obviously, who have experience with different phases of functioning of the committee. I think that's a really important part to get the history and the background of how the committee's functioned in the past. Not that that has to be how it has to function in the future, but certainly some of the vision, some of the ideas about how it's gone. So I appreciate if that is a part of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, welcome your comments. I know I've been talking to a lot of people who've been here, have the institutional memory, and I guess it goes back to way back to 1986, something like that. So anyway, yes, Lyle.
I just want to know if the changing of the guard. No. Thank you. I just want to know if the changing of the calendar to every other month is a set in stone, it's a done deal, or are we going to talk about it? Well, I see that it's done here, but I mean, I think I'd like to have the opportunity to tell you why I don't think that's a good idea.
We would love to have it every month if we could, but I got to tell you that it's tough to do, and the reason why we're doing it is because of the furloughs and because of the workload.
Certainly, Juan, we all understand that it's tough to do, and we understand that the furloughs are cutting into your time and all of those things. However, the downside of this has the potential of having severe ramifications on school districts, and I think it'd be nice to have a conversation about it before you just arbitrarily say you don't care.
Can you clarify how that it could have adverse effects to school districts?
I'm sorry?
I mean, can you elaborate on why you think it's going to have adverse effects on districts if you go every other month?
I can elaborate on it at the proper time, and I'd like to have an opportunity to think about this and bring back valid reasons, not just stuff that I got to think about right this second. This is the first time I've heard of this concept, and I have the same attitude about this as I do about the State Allocation Board going to an every other month agenda, that the amount of time that goes by without conversation, decisions are held off another period of time, et cetera, that has a potential for ramifications. And I just think it would be nice to have a conversation about it before you just do it. I understand workload. I understand those issues as well as anybody. But at the same time, that's a function of how do you distribute your workload. And if you distribute your workload in such a fashion so that it's beneficial always to the state and never to the school districts, and I'm not saying that's the situation here, but I'm just saying that's what this feels like, okay? That the school districts not having the opportunity to have input into this are just unilaterally being told, pardon my use of this term, but I don't care, yeah, we can have conversations, but in the end result, we're going to do what we want to. And I'm just saying it would be nice if we could still have a conversation about it at a future meeting. If the decision is, you're still going to do it, you're still going to do it. I mean, but I'd just like to have an opportunity to talk about it. That's all.
Appreciate that. And also just keep in mind what I was mentioning earlier, that doesn't mean that we can have a meeting on the off months. If we need to schedule something that's urgent, we still can do that, and we will do that. But
it'd be easier if you'd schedule it and then cancel if you don't have enough to talk about, because people can schedule. If you schedule for every other month, then you say, oh, okay, we're going to have a special meeting, that creates additional hardships. I mean, yeah, I agree they aren't enormous, hideous, ugly things, but they are an issue, because then you've got to somehow or other communicate to the world that you're going to have a special meeting. Somebody doesn't get the memo or whatever, and the next thing you know, stand at the board going, I didn't know anything about this, and those kind of issues.
I can't really explain how for us to prepare the items, and I'm not trying to whine here, just trying to let you guys know that there's a lot of time that is spent on preparing these items, on writing the items and reviewing the items, and it's really a workload issue. We don't have the time that we had before. I would love to tell my staff, hey, tough, you got 3 days off each month, just do it, but I can't. I won't do that. We do what we can, and keep in mind that all along this is part of what we do. We're still trying to process millions of dollars each month in at this point, unfortunately, in unfunded approvals. So this is something on top of that, and that is the priority, Lyle, to keep that process going so that districts can receive their funds. But right now, and that's why we're proposing this, and unless other members have strong objections, I'd like to keep that, and I would ask that you respect that and you consider the hardships that we're facing right now.
Well, and I ran this committee for 10 years. I think I understand the workload to put one together. I'm the person probably more in your corner in that regard than anyone else here, except maybe Bruce, since I think he ran it longer than I did. But nonetheless, I'm not asking you to change it. I'm asking you to give us an opportunity to tell you why that's a problem. And if you say, okay, I heard all your problems and I still can't do it, or I won't do it, or however you want to put it, that's fine. I think I'm just asking for the opportunity to have that conversation.
Yes, Margie. So with regard to scheduling, just our calendars, I do like the idea of holding the dates every month and canceling it. It is much more difficult to add a date back in than it is to say, oh, we don't have to come on January 4th to the IMP or whatever the date's going to be. That is much nicer and much cleaner, and you guys will have a room, which is always a problem. I mean, you've been good so far, but if we save the dates and then cancel them as we didn't need them, I think that is an easier thing to do than it is going backwards. And that's always what we do, even with school board meetings. When we think we might be canceling them, we still keep them on our calendar. So I want to make that suggestion as well.
Okay, Bill, and then I wanted to say something.
Well, I want to disagree with that notion, and actually I want to support Juan, because I think the hardest piece, we have just gotten furloughed in our school district too, and the hardest piece when you have a reduced work window is that everyone still expects you to do the same thing you've always done. We have to be really clear with people. We cannot do the same amount of work when we're not getting paid for being there all the time, and it's not fair, and it's a direct result of the legislature and the governor and the state of California being unwilling or unable to fund, or the economy, whatever it is. But we cannot support the same level of work, and I don't think we should expect state workers who are being furloughed to support the same workload, because and you have to be honest about it. You can't do it. It's not possible to maintain the workload when you have reduced staffing, and you have to expect reduction in services.
All right, thank you, Bill. And also, I just wanted to note that in having the extra time, perhaps we can beef up the agendas that we do have. And right now we have 4. Usually we have 2 items on the agenda. I'm sorry? Yeah, well, hopefully. And the idea would be for folks who have comments or questions or on any of those items, that they would submit it to staff so they would have time to incorporate that in there, so we can have the analysis when they do come up to have a lot of those comments and concerns addressed and already incorporated into the agendas.
One possibility also would be to consider starting at 9 and finishing at 4. I mean, if you're going to have a 2-month meeting thing, change it so you started a half hour earlier and finished half hour later.
Good point. Deborah, I'm sorry, did you have?
Refresh my memory. How do items get put on this list? Oh. Did you guys talk about that before I arrived this morning? Okay, never mind.
Can I clarify some confusion? People seem to think Lyle's retirement celebration tonight was because he was retiring. It's for the impact that he's had on K-12 facilities. It's not because he's retiring.
Any more retirement news? I think I have Lyle. Is it Richard and Bill? I think. and Bruce. All right. Richard, did you say no? I'm sorry. It was. I'm sorry, Richard. I don't think you were retiring. All right. It was Bruce then. Okay. We have 3.
May I remind you that Brett Favre retired also?
Again? Again? Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for all your comments. And again, for the people watching from the districts or in their offices, this committee for the web address or the email address to provide comments on the discussions and on future items is SAB-IMP, as in Paul, at dgs.ca.gov. So please feel free to submit your comments and discussion and concerns with any of these items and the discussions we've had today and those that are in the future that are on our list. So thank you very much. And on that note, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.